Scottish people and Native Americans. It might sound like two types of people from opposite ends of the earth who would never meet, but in actual fact, history tells us there were many encounters between Scottish people and Native Americans. They forged deep, lasting relationships, and that's what I want to talk about right here in today's episode. Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to today's episode. My name is Sean. I am a YouTuber from Edinburgh in Scotland. Right here on this channel, I talk all about my connection with the United States of America, following many trips to the country over the last few years. Now, I never knew much about Native American people, about the story, about everything they've been through, and the many different types of Native people in the United States of America and Canada throughout the Americas. Until quite recently as well. It was just not something that came up really in my education. But it's something I've always had an interest in. And last year, I took a trip to North Carolina where I could explore a little bit more about Native American people, their culture, and their lands as well. And I thought it'd be an interesting topic for today's video because actually there are a lot of connections between Scottish people and Native Americans. Now, I started to become aware of this through watching Outlander. Outlander is a TV show on the Starz network, also on Amazon Prime, that tells the story of Scottish people, Scottish clan members, from around the time of the Jacobite uprising, the Battle of Culloden, and how those people eventually left Scotland and ended up in North America. We all know they colonised lots and lots of different parts of North America, but they ended up in the Outlander story in North Carolina. And through that story, from the very season that they land in North Carolina, we see the Scottish people, straight from the Highlands, interacting with Native American people of various different tribes. And I just thought that was an absolutely fascinating thing. But it's not fiction, and that's the great thing about Outlander. It's a fictional show, but it's telling a real story of real Scottish people who left the country and ended up in North America. And of course, they would have came across Native American people. And back in those days, it was basically only their land. There was large parts of the continent of North America that white people hadn't really colonised at that time. And so to see that portrayal in Outlander of how the Scottish people came into connection with the various different tribes, for example, the Cherokee, was absolutely fascinating. And in fact, even one of the Scottish members of the family, young Ian, if you've not read the books, which are up there behind me, or seen the show, I very much recommend that you do. But young Ian, one of the family members, he actually goes off, basically becomes a member of their family, their tribe. I'm sure that's a story we'll find out more about in coming seasons. But I thought this was fascinating. And how real was this? So last year, I went to North Carolina myself. You can actually check out that video on my channel. I'll put a link down below. And that's where I want to start off today's story because we listened to various different people from the Cherokee, for example, telling stories, telling ancient stories, and we actually had the opportunity to ask them some questions. And I thought a question I really, really wanted to know was about their people's interaction with Scottish people. How did they come across? Because we all know about the many bad interactions Native American people would have had with the white man. Lots of terrible things happened, so how did they view Scottish people? And I was really, really surprised by the chief telling me that they favoured Scottish people because the Scots were seen as people that they could trade openly and honestly with. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. That the Cherokee, as a tribe, actually favoured Scottish people to deal with, to trade with, to build relationships with. And I wanted to explore that a bit further in today's episode. So that's really what this is all about. And I just want to say thank you. It's great to see you all here. If you're new to my channel, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and then you'll be in. So in today's video, I've really got 9 different ways to tell you about which showed that the Scottish people and Native Americans were very well connected, had deep roots and connections together, and how they interacted. But before I start, I have to say that all wasn't always the case, despite what the chief told me. There were definitely cases where Scottish people were colonisers in every sense of the word. They pillaged and took land from them. They did a lot of terrible things as well, right? So that has to be recognised up front. Scottish people, when they went to North America, the Americas, and settled there, were no saints. But to go into that topic in detail, I think would require a lot of research and a lot of studying, and that's something that I would really, really like to do. So if anybody out there has any connections with Native Americans who have more information, I'd certainly like to learn more. I'm going to do my own research as well. But I'm going to focus on some positive things, some positive connections between Scotland and Native American people today. Starting with the first thing, because it's important to remember there really were 2 types of Scottish people who both existed within Scotland at the time and also ended up going over to North America, either by force or by choice. A lot of Scottish people went there by choice because they wanted land or because they might have been part of the British colonial empire's ambitions. They might have also been kicked off the land in Scotland and had nowhere else to go. Offered this new land in the Americas, they took the chance. It was a hard life. But essentially there were 2 types of Scottish people. And this is probably simplifying it a bit much, but there were the Scottish people who simply wanted to go there, farm, and continue their way of life, their clan way of life that they existed in Scotland for hundreds and thousands of years. And then there were the Scottish people who were with the British, really, in colonial ambition. Some of them wore redcoats and were leaders of armies. But I think it's fair to say both Native American people and Scottish people were persecuted. For Scottish people at home, and also when they went to the New World, essentially. Native American, as we know, had a huge history of persecution. Scottish people were seen as, certainly the Highlanders, Scottish Highlanders, were seen by the rest of the British, and even a lot of Scottish people as well, like Lowlanders, for example, in Edinburgh and Glasgow, were seen as savage tribes, unsophisticated, uneducated. And that's precisely why, the Scottish way of life, the clan system, and the language, the Scottish Gaelic language, was removed and dismantled brutally by the British Empire. Tartan was even banned at one point. And that just goes to show, Scottish people, especially the Highlanders, were persecuted quite badly, lost their land, kicked off their land, houses burnt down, they were raped, they were pillaged, all that kind of bad stuff, right? And at the same token, the Native Americans as well suffered a very similar experience in a lot of cases. Disputed lands ended up in bloody battles, and a lot of terrible things happened. So I think both Native American people and Scottish people, who were mostly from the Highlands, suffered very similar fates in that sense in terms of persecution. Number 2, and I think this one is going to surprise a lot of people, especially in America, because this tends to be a dirty word, right? For people in the States. But both Scottish Highlanders, who ended up going over to the Americas to set up their new way of life, and Native Americans were socialist in the way they set up their families, their life, their social life, and their economics. They have very socialist principles in how they operated. The clan system and the chief system, Native American tribe system, were very similar actually in some ways. And I think that's a fascinating concept. The way that those societies were organized were essentially quite similar, and it was based around a socialist structure. Their lands were tribal, not necessarily seen as something that was government owned, but owned by the family, by the community. Private ownership and ambition was not seen as something that was really central to the way that those people operated. But essentially the way the structure of their societies were arranged was socialist, and it was very similar between Native Americans and Scottish people. I find that a really interesting concept. Number 3, both Scottish Highlanders and Native Americans were kind of similar in the way that they were survivors. Scottish people from the Highlands, when they were kicked off their land and sent over to North America, they were essentially back into the mountains, back into highlands that were quite wild. There was a lot of wild animals and there wasn't any structure for them. They had to eke out a living on really rough lands. And of course the Native Americans knew the lands well, and they've been doing that for centuries, hundreds and thousands of years. But both Native Americans and Scottish people, the Highlanders, they were survivors. They knew how to live off the land, and they knew how to make a living off the land. It wasn't that they were uncivilized, it was that they knew the earth. They had a deep connection with the planet, the earth that they lived on, and how to feed themselves from it, how to make shelter. Scottish people were very good at that, and of course the Native Americans were as well. And I'd like to think they traded techniques in some sides of things as well. And 4, as history progressed, both Scottish people and Native American people started to make interconnected relationships with each other that ended up in marriages and children. And this reached all across the Americas. And, there's a lot of people from certain tribes today that would absolutely be a Native American, but they would definitely have Scottish ancestry. Such was the strong connection that Scottish people and Native Americans had, and such were the frequency in which people got together and started to make families in between the two different types of people. And actually there's some very prominent cases of that happening, and I will touch on that in today's video. I want to give you this example. Number 5, a lot of Scottish people and Native American people became very prominent in what was to become the United States of America in that way of life. Let's take, for example, Alexander McGillivray. He was the son of a Scottish trader, father, and a Creek French mother. He became chief, and was a dominant chief, of the powerful Creek Confederacy in the late 18th century. He had a pivotal role in conducting the tribe's foreign policies with Britain, Spain, and the United States. In 1790, George Washington even invited him to the temporary federal capital in New York City, where he negotiated the first treaty made by the United States after the adoption of the Constitution. That's incredible. I mean, that's a case of a man who was very much Scottish, but very much Native American as well. And he became prominent, invited to the capital by George Washington, and played a really important role in securing rights. Like I showed you from North Carolina, this is my next point, the Cherokee people were particularly connected with Scottish people. They had a lot of relations, trading relations, that lasted for many years. And of course, as well, they ended up in relationships in terms of marriage and children and all that kind of stuff as well. And it's believed that up to 50% of Cherokee people today can have some kind of ancestry tracing back to Scotland. Such was the prominence of those types of relationships happening. And half of them could actually be descended from one man, who was called Ludovic Grant. He was a laird's son from Cherokee. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Cherokee, or Creeshie, in Aberdeenshire. Grant was captured while fighting for the Jacobite army in the Battle of Preston in 1715 and was almost hung, but he escaped, transported to South Carolina, where he was an indentured servant. After his release, he started working as a trader for the Cherokee people and ended up marrying into the tribe, produced a daughter, and she became head of a massive Cherokee family and basically thousands of people today who are Cherokee of Scottish descent as well. That is a fascinating story. I need to learn more about this man and his travels. Maybe I'll follow in his footsteps one day, trace that story so that we can tell it in a kind of modern digital age. That would be fascinating to do. There's a thought for a video. I'll need to come to the Carolinas again. Number 7, this leads me on to another very prominent person within the Cherokee people. John Ross. Sounds like a very Scottish name, doesn't it? Well, he was actually the chief of the Cherokee people, and over a very important time for the Cherokee people in their history. He was chief around 1830, which was the time of the so-called Indian removal, when the United States expelled 80,000 Indian people from their homelands east of the Mississippi. Ross was a leader in opposing that. Very Scottish name, John Ross. You could not get a more Scottish name, and yet he was a Cherokee chief. How fascinating. He had Scottish family, Scottish descended, and he was also, of course, Cherokee. Number 8, this one I absolutely love, as somebody who likes to tell stories myself. But both Scottish people, especially the clan people of the Highlands, and Native American people were storytellers, deep, true storytellers in every sense of the word. Bards, poets. Scottish Highland societies, the clan systems, were built up around storytelling. Campfires and stories, that's how their traditions and their history passed on. The bard culture of Scotland even remains until today. It's fascinating that we are a nation of storytellers. And I'd like to think of myself as one as well, carrying that forward in the modern age, like I say. It's something that's deep within us, deep within our blood, and I think that's great. Storytelling is such an important thing, and it obviously takes many forms, but that's something that Scottish people took. They took it with them to America when they went there as well. But, of course, we know the Native American people were very deep in their storytelling culture as well. It was such an important part of their history. You had thousands of different tribes, and they all spoke different languages, which is thought to be the richest, most diverse range of languages which they could not be understood within each other anywhere in the world that ever existed. We're talking thousands of languages. And how did they get by? How did they pass on information between tribes, between each other, and down through their family? They told stories, just like the Scots, through dancing, through festival, through fire, through drawings, and through their artwork, and through the clothes they used to make. These were all methods of storytelling. Such a deep connection, and a really, really fascinating one that I'd love to know more about. And in fact, Scottish people, one of the things they remarked upon when they went to the Americas, and especially when, America started to form as a country, was the fact that Native Americans were so strong diplomatically because they could stand up and they could speak and tell a story. They could tell their own people's story. They were public speakers of the day, and they were expert at it. Number 9, my last point, and this is something that's quite sad, right? But also curious about human history and the past we've had. Both cultures, as we know, as we talked about at the beginning, were persecuted in various different times throughout history. Both by their own people, by different tribes, by colonialists, by the British Empire, by lots of different groups persecuted. Scottish Highlanders, certainly, and also Native Americans. Absolutely, something that, needs to be explored and discovered and learned about, and I want to do that, right? But they were both persecuted, but both in a modern setting today are romanticised and talked about and celebrated. Scottish culture, tartan and all that kind of stuff, the stories of the Highlands, it's come back in popular culture as romantic. Scottish people, like I said, were seen as savages. Not something you would want to associate yourself with, but in modern times, even from like the Victorian times, the Highland way of life and tartan and all that became like a romantic notion, and then was eventually celebrated once there was no threat of the people fighting back anymore. And it's the same I feel with Native American culture as well. I feel like a lot of young people today are very romantic about their culture and interested in learning more. I certainly am as well. I want to know about the fashions, the trends, and the history, and learn about them more and celebrate them. And I think that is an interesting turn of events if you look at overall history throughout the two different cultures. Anyway, this is fascinating. This is a topic that I don't know enough about. And I appreciate there's quite a few people who actually watch my channel who are Native American and Highlanders as well. Both sides. And I would love to get your perspective on things. Any thoughts on how I could take this forward and learn more? I think because in Scotland and the UK, it's something that seems quite far away for us and something a bit disconnected. I'd love to go to places in America where I can learn more about this and actually do some videos, talk about it more, because it's such a fascinating, interesting thing, culture and storytelling that we need to pass on through generations. Hopefully I can contribute a little bit to that here on YouTube. But I very much appreciate you guys watching. It's been great to speak to you about this. Like I said, thoughts down below. Make sure you come and follow me on all the different social medias. I'll put the links down below, and I'll also put the links to the videos that are relevant to this. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate you. And until the next adventure, I hope you have a good night, morning, evening, afternoon, or whatever time of day it is wherever you are in the world. Take care.